So here I want to show you the font demo, which shows the capabilities to change keyboard fonts just by the software. And that was also something completely new, which the Apple III brought to the table. So this is a little program. It checks for fonts, and then you can just with a press of a key go through the fonts. So this is the Apple font, Roman font, standard font called Bug 1. There's a font. This is a Greek font. I want to just see how fast this goes. This is really the hardware inside which switch the fonts, which are software defined. So this is Gothic, Old English. I would not want to read any text in Old English because, well, I can't see this. Then it's inverse, pudgy, Roman, Celtic. So you can see that was software defined, not as in Apple II, where you had to switch really chips to change your fonts. So now I want to show you the Apple II emulation modus. As said before, this is a special thing. It's not a software emulation. The Apple III has hardware built in to emulate the Apple II. However, marketing of Apple didn't want to have a complete copy of the Apple II inside the Apple III. So they actually had to go through the extra hoops to make the hardware so that the Apple II emulation could not access the extra capabilities of an Apple III. For example, I can't connect to the profile drive. I can't connect to more than 2 disk drives. Sorry, I had to remember that. So disk 1 and disk 2 are accessible. Disk 3 is not accessible through the Apple II emulation. Excuse me. And of course it didn't have the language card built in. It was just a 48K Apple II. All software written for an Apple II 48K would work. Now back in 1980, that might be some acceptable trade-off, because there was plenty of software for just a base Apple II system. They don't had always the language card, because they were, even the 48K Apple was very expensive. They sold back then 16K Apples because the RAM chips were so expensive. But enough about that. I go now to the Apple II emulation, which, by the way, in my setup runs from my hard disk. So, Apple II emulation. You would normally boot a floppy with the Apple II emulation mode that came with the Apple III. But as I say, this is on the hard disk already installed. So that's all what you have. You have configuration menu, and here you can decide, do you want to start your Apple II in AppleSoft or in Integer Basic? Back then you would just head on the Apple II, a little switch on the back side, and it would load either AppleSoft or Integer Basic, or you would in software, if you have a language card, load Integer Basic into the language card and have both AppleSoft and Integer Basic. Not possible in the simulation. Simulation, you have to decide, okay, I want to do AppleSoft or Integer Basic. I show the difference. The serial card built in an Apple III is accessible. I can put it in serial or communication mode, so for printer or modem mode, I can change the baud rate, all these other things, right? Line feed, line width, and so on. There is a second version of this Apple II emulation software which has even more settings, but bottom line is you can't exceed an Apple II with 48K. So what I will do is now I will start the Apple II emulation mode and put in my old trusty DOS 3.3 system master disk. So out with the booting disk and in with my DOS 3.3 in disk 1, and I hit return. You can see Apple II logo comes up. It now, in this moment, it behaves like an Apple II. So this is DOS version 3.3, and it works like an Apple II. So also if I want to access now my first disk drive, this is now disk volume 254. I mean, this is exactly how an Apple II would work. And I can run a demo program, run Ryan's theme, a little graphic program which came with the Apple II. Return to continue. And I can see this is something back in the day. It was stunning graphics. Nowadays it's well, nostalgic. I don't want to run through the whole thing because I want to show you something else. On the DOS 3.3 there was a very iconic graphic demonstration, and that was, oops, sorry, run Apple Vision. Now the guys who know already the Apple II know I will run in the program now. It tries to load it and oh, language not available. What is going on? Well, Apple Vision is written in integer basic. So what I have to do right now is to reconfigure my Apple II emulation. So back in with my boot disk. I have to warm boot my Apple III in Apple III mode right now because I have to reconfigure the Apple II emulation. So give it a second, it loads, there it is. I go languages, I go Apple emulation, configuration, and I say I want to have integer basic. Now, out with my boot disk, in with my DOS 3.3 disk. And this time my Apple boots with the integer basic. You can already see this. Have you noticed? The cursor has changed. That indicates I'm in integer basic. So run Apple Vision. And that was one of these astonishing programs for the Apple II. Like the horse program was for the Apple III. I showed this on my introduction video, which was back at the time really wow, that was graphic nobody has seen before. And this here is an example for the Apple II, and this is a little bit a peek view in my series. When I go over the Apple II, I will go also over this old software. Now Bob Bishop programmed this little program, and he was also amazed how people react on it. And I will be silent for a second because enjoy the show. This is really nice and simple. So everybody was really amazed about this little man inside the TV who was dancing, and Bob Bishop did some tricks with the software. He was also, oh, before it starts again, I press a reset button. And I remember it was also in the early 1980s when I had my Apple II clone. I couldn't afford an original Apple. and I saw the Apple Vision, I was like, wow, how are they doing this? And that was back then. We were not expecting those things. So people like Bob Bishop opened a completely new world for us. Other things are, of course, some of the older games are running. I have here not a copy, an original from Centipede. So that was a very popular game back then. The graphics on an Apple II were not that great. Things like the Atari 2600 console, or I would even say the VIC-20 had better graphics in that case, but it would work. So I just want to show you this. A lot of other software has sometimes trouble with working on it. Of course, things like Pascal wouldn't work because you need the language card. I found a copy of Forth, the programming language Forth, which is running. So you could program your Apple II emulation in Forth. Well, you can see this is Centipede. The problem is the Apple II emulation is a little bit faster than the original Apple. You can already see this. The Centipede and the Spider are moving extremely fast. I tried to play it, it's impossible. You can't play it. Now, most of these old games were programmed that they use the maximum speed they could get, because the Apple II, well, it was at 1 megahertz, and it wasn't the fastest computer. So they opted to go with timing on the processor. And that is a problem of emulation. You can't adjust this emulation. You can't say emulate only 1 megahertz Apple II, because Apple III was designed as a business computer, not as a gaming computer. So when you want to run things like VisiCalc or so, you want to have every speed advantage you get. Anyhow, this showed you the capabilities of the Apple II emulation. It is there. It is honestly a little bit a crippled emulation. They could have done better, but from all what I have read was that marketing didn't want to have this, because they didn't want to have people buying the Apple III as a better Apple II. They really want to separate these two computers. Of course, there was so much software available for the Apple II. They want to have this as a little benefit, but not for games or so. They want to have it for software which was not available at the start of the Apple III. Because keep in mind, they thought the Apple III is the next thing to the Apple II. Apple II will die in 1 or 2 years. Apple III will take off and be our main source of income. Well, it came differently. They lost money on the Apple III. But again, and this is something which I will go in more detail into when I do my conclusions. I think Apple got his money out of the Apple III. It didn't work out like they wanted to have it, but I would not label it a complete failure.